Alien Earth Episode 5 finally reveals how the Maginot crew died, and guess what? There's a secret clue that we found buried in a flash drive sent out in a press kit that already revealed the way the crew died. We're going to unpack those Easter eggs and much more. Welcome to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and hidden details you might have missed in Alien Earth Episode 5. So this episode takes us back inside the Maginot for a deeper look into how the crew perished, in an episode that is our most faithful homage to Ridley Scott's initial voyage aboard the Nostromo. So faithful that an exact recreation of the set was used for the episode, and I'm so excited that we got this because honestly, it would have been a shame to have this motley crew of space truckers taken out quicker than Newt and Corporal Hicks in Alien 3.
Why did you say that name?
The entire episode plays out like a what-if version of Ridley Scott's original, but with updated references from future films and terrifying biological expansions of the alien lore. Unlike the last episode, this one returns the focus back to the Xenomorph, who returns into the intro as well, lying down in an isolated black space. Since this episode technically happened before the others, we don't see the split-second recap spliced into the title screen like we have in previous episodes, but we do get a callback to the very first episode when we witness the Maginot crew eating together. So this gives our first look at how the specimens got loose aboard the Maginot, kicking off just a little more than 2 weeks before the crash in New Siam. Returning to the Maginot also gives us an even deeper look into the ship, which is covered in these standardized symbols and signs, which are all a part of a code called the Semiotic Standard. Rob Cobb designed this field for the first Alien film, and we can see Hawley kept that consistent on his set as well. The first example of which are right behind them, with the red X symbol in the center of the doorway, meaning hazard, and the two signs above them signal for a ladder port and a bulkhead door. The look of the Nostromo's corridors was designed to evoke the feeling of a World War II submarine, and those same references also influenced the Maginot's design. Morrow gets woken up from a cryosleep after getting word of a fire on board that somehow resulted in 2 crew members becoming infected, hopping out of nothing but his boxers just like Ripley in the first movie, casually strutting around the escape pod before stumbling upon the scariest peeping Tom ever. Now in that situation, she assumed that she was safe because she was alone and there was no danger, but here Morrow is just as casual because of the danger and how immediately he seeks to confront it. The junior security officer is named Clemedy, whose name seems like a reference to Dr. Jonathan Clemens in Alien 3, and he tries to fill him in on the situation, describing the facehuggers as
the octopus with the long fingers,
which shows how little the crew actually knew about the creatures that they're dealing with, especially compared to what we've seen from Prodigy and their research. Now, I should note that weeks ago we combed through a flash drive that we actually found from a wreckage case that was recovered from the Maginot, and get this, on that flash drive we saw evidence that a fire broke out, and that is what allowed the aliens to escape, which was confirmed in this episode. Now, in this sequence, it's easy to focus on Morrow, but Clem actually spoils a lot of the plot here, saying,
she used the word compromise, which she and Bronsky are hooked up now.
Which not only plants the seed in Morrow's head to take control of the ship later, but also subtly hints toward why he seems so suspiciously driven to see his assignment all the way through. Or what do you mean? Well, while Clem is really just trying to gossip, he's talking about his crewmates' human connection that ultimately leaves them compromised, which is essentially the general idea that Morrow walks away with after the crash. He resents his human side, as he made clear in episode 3.
Be all machine instead of what I am. Who was parts of the man.
And now we have context as to why. From the death of his daughter to the death of all his crewmates on board, he's been provided with countless examples of just how compromising humanity really is. Everyone on board the ship perishes due to either human error, complacency, or just being paralyzed by raw emotion, defining humanity in a completely different way than how we've seen the show do thus far. Up until now, the synthetics were defining what it means to be human, using things like empathy and free will as tests for the hybrids. But this episode complicates that even further, showcasing a full spectrum of humanity's most compromising flaws. As Morrow walks into the lab, he shuts off the alarm to get their attention. After addressing his lack of attire, they inform him that the captain is dead after they tried to cut the facehugger, and the acid blood is what took him out, something that almost happened in the first movie, but luckily they started with the fingers first, so they figured it out without any casualties. When Raheem tries to explain what happens, he first says,
Thanks.
I tried to remove the creature.
Showing how everyone aboard the ship is trying to dodge as much responsibility as possible, given that the captain can dock your pay at any point, as we see later. Now, hold on. Ooh, that's scary.
Oh, wait, what's going on?
Is it monsters? No, it looks like some of my personal information could have been compromised in a massive data breach. And by the way, that's serious stuff, man. Did you know that cyber criminals can get your information and then take out loans in your name? Oh wow, that's even scarier than monsters. I know, and get this, health insurance companies will actually pay these massive firms called data brokers for your private data, and then they can actually raise your rates based on your online activity, especially data they pull from health apps. Wow, that's scary. Very scary. So, like I was saying, if you got... Wait, you're not worried about all that stuff? No, not at all, because I signed us up for the Family Unlimited plan from Incogni. They're the sponsor of this video. Incogni is one of my favorite sponsors we talk about on this channel. This is the app that they don't want you to know about. So far, Incogni has found 881 companies that were selling my sensitive information. And we are talking about my search history, financial details, my health history, and then they were selling that information to the highest bidder. In fact, Incogni even tells you the dangers associated with these companies: data leaks, spam calls, identity theft, even stalking. But then Incogni contacts those companies on your behalf, and then they legally have to remove your information. So far, Incogni has completed 798 removal requests on my behalf, so my personal information is now being suppressed. Guys, look, your private data is a valuable commodity to all these shady firms who just want to sell that information to the highest bidder. And this goes beyond just like robocalls and spam emails. Massive data breaches are constantly compromising our data. Like in July, Allianz Life announced a huge breach comprised the data of 1.4 million of their customers. This data included names, dates of birth, email addresses, phone numbers, and even your actual address. So when third parties like this have your personal data, you don't always know where it ends up. And that's where Incogni comes in to scrub that data from the internet. In fact, I signed me and Doug up for the Unlimited and Family Unlimited plan, which includes the custom removal feature. So if we see our data on a specific website, we reach out to Incogni and then their agents handle the rest. So I highly recommend giving Incogni a try. Use my code ScreenCrush with the link below to get an exclusive deal, 60% off an Incogni plan. That is a great bargain you don't want to miss. Now, back to what I was saying. Now, of course, the med bay that they're using is the same one that we see at the crash site in episode 1, and as expected, it's nearly an exact replica of the one used in the original 79 film. The sign on top of it is the semiotic standard for laser, and in the corner, we see 3 more signs, one for photonic systems or fiber optics like the ones we see used later, another for high radioactivity, possibly used for some kind of X-ray, and one for astronic systems, a fancy word for electronics. When deciding what to do with the science officer, we hear Dr. Chibuzzo say,
"The protocols are very clear. Any crew member who comes into contact with alien life forms are to be placed in cryosleep for the remainder of the journey."
Which is something that was actually suggested in the first Alien movie, but ignored.
How come they don't freeze it?
As Morrow makes a plan of action for the crew, he teases his junior security officer, calling him Chlamydia, which is not only an obvious pun on his last name, but also continues the ever-so-subtle sexual overtones that the franchise is known for. As Morrow walks back to his quarters to get dressed, he passes by the lead engineer, Schmoll, who suggests,
Put them both in the airlock and have done with it.
which is objectively the best solution and may have worked, but of course it would have tossed out valuable specimens that Weyland-Yutani has paid for, so they can't have that. And this is when we find out about the Saboteur, which we actually learned about in episode 3 when Morrow reported into Yutani.
We were sabotaged.
They've taken out the navigation and engine relays, which has turned the ship into a giant alien-filled missile headed straight for Earth. Like the doctors, Morrow responds with,
You should fix that.
They are incredibly callous when reacting to what should be seen as life-threatening, and immediately pass off or flat out deny any responsibility whenever possible. Now, this could be showing how numb they are after facing so many similar life situations, or simply their economic commitment to be sure that they aren't doing anything outside of their job description. Still, it certainly distinguishes them as co-workers rather than a close-knit community who are looking out for each other, as we would have assumed after their family dinner in episode 1. As Clem and Dr. Chibuzzo enter the zoo—
Oh, are we gonna get to go to the zoo?
Not now, buddy, this weekend, like I told you. After they enter the zoo, we see a green square in the corner, semiotic for organic life, since they are in a biocontainment lab. The door behind them also seems to access a pressurized area given the signs above it. Now, Chibuzzo does some heavy foreshadowing as she says,
Panel lights are green. If containment was broken, they'd be red.
which we obviously see later when the T-Oculus breaks loose. And you guys know how much we love Alien and Alien movies, which is why we designed these shirts for our merch store. We have a real cool chest burster popping out of your chest, and this is my personal favorite, this alien popping out of your chest with a little hat and cane like this guy.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
We love designing shirts for you guys at our merch store. You can find links for these below, and if you become a member, you get free stuff. Then we get get this incredible shot from the outside of the Maginot that flips vertically as it zooms in, as we see Morrow and Captain Xaveres walking around vertically, due to the ship's artificial gravity, which shows a sense of insignificance through the contrasting scale of the ship and the tiny crew aboard it, but also just how artificial their reality is. Artificial gravity has become so normalized in sci-fi that most of us just assume it's there, but visually showing it like this forces the viewer to recognize how unnatural this is, which presents a stark contrast to their conversation. Here we see Morrow hone in on what caused the fire, determining that it had to be human error due to Mother's routine programming, before chastising Zephyr for hooking up with Bronsky, which clearly becomes validating examples for Morrow's resentment when they turn out to be true later on. When Morrow points out how Xaveres' feelings toward Bronsky may require him to take over the helm as captain, she replies with,
"That's mutiny,"
a term most commonly heard in pirate stories, further reiterating how Morrow is the Captain Hook of Neverland's Peter Pan metaphor.
Oh no.
Now, of course, Morrow stays true to the mission protocol, even if it risks the crew's life, mirroring Ash's role in the first movie, only he is not hiding it. When Xaveres asks to talk to Mother with him, he responds with,
You talk to the computer. My orders are from Yutani herself.
which is interesting. At first, it seems like Morrow's synthetic superiority complex has some kind of reverse robophobia, but the fact that he sees Yutani as the highest authority, even above Mother, shows that his true allegiance is to the mission above all else. We saw this teased in episode 3 when he tells Yutani,
These creatures, they are my life's work, and I'm gonna get them back.
When we turn back to the crew, they're putting the lead science officer in the cryopod, where Rakim hits him with this quote.
Not a victory for the enemy of reason.
Now, this is a common phrase typically used to critique an illogical choice made for superficial reasons, or as he puts it,
This space bug is proof of how stupid smart people can be. Smart enough to build ships capable of space travel, but too stupid to realize you don't bring parasites home with you.
which is a perfect explanation for who the real villains in this franchise are.
Yeah, aliens, right?
That's the thing, Doug. The Xenomorphs aren't really the bad guys. Never have been. And this isn't me trying to turn this into an insert bad guy was right here video. It makes sense when you think about it. See, the Xenos are simply living creatures trying to do what any other living thing does, survive and replicate. They only harm humans because it's their natural instinct to do so, either for the sake of their hive or to simply escape. The Xenomorphs are doing just what Xenomorphs do. Their behavior isn't the result of malicious intent, but rather the consequence of corporate hubris, the real enemy of reason. The carnage they cause is simply a result of man pushing nature beyond the limits of their understanding for their own selfish ambitions. This is why Alien has more in common with films like Jurassic Park and Godzilla than actual alien movies like E.T. or War of the Worlds, and the situation here exemplifies that perfectly. Instead of tossing out the specimens or even the infected host altogether, as Schmoll suggests, they risk the crew's life by attempting to unfreeze it, which of course ultimately backfires. Raheem explains to Clem that they're taking this risk simply so Weyland-Yutani can potentially weaponize it against their competitors, further validating how the terror these creatures cause is the consequence of corporate quest for power, as well as the legitimacy of Boy Cavalier's concerns last episode.
Are you sure you wouldn't like to return them to Yutani and get back to the work at hand?
So I can wake up one day with a xenomorph in my belly? No, thank you.
And speaking of validation, this episode also validates our assumptions from episode 1, that Mr. Tank isn't a synth, but rather just a creepy dude. Clearly, Hawley set him up to play with our expectations, making him eerily reminiscent of Ash, the synthetic Yutani mole in the first film. And he's even rocking the same jacket that we see the Saboteur using later on. Now, obviously the big clue is how he watched over one of his female crewmates in cryo in the creepy way that we've seen synths look over their crewmates before. But as we see later, he's just an unashamed perv. He shows us yet another dark side of humanity that can be equally robotic and cold when seeking to satisfy their own self-interest. Morrow goes to investigate how the fire started in the containment room, and judging by the massive amount of water pouring in from the ceiling, it's pretty hard to imagine a fire lasting 5 seconds in this room at all.
Everything's wet. Why is everything so wet?
We see him pass by the plumbicaire, which follows him with its pistol. That's the center part of a flower, which, as we know from the log entries in episode 3, is how it sees its prey, by exposing the sensitive enzyme inside. He finds the door to the Ovomorph's cage is still open, and eventually finds a hole where the facehugger's blood has melted through several layers of the ship, just like we saw happen in the first movie when Ash tried to remove the facehugger's finger.
But that was cause he cut him, right? Does that mean the facehugger cut itself?
Well, the Xenos have been known to use their blood like that before. In Resurrection, 2 Xenos maul a smaller one to escape captivity using its blood. So there's definitely a precedent for this kind of behavior. However, this is likely just the spot where Raheem tried to cut the facehugger off the captain, since not only were there no acid burns beneath his neck in the medbay, but also because it's where his body ended up in the security camera footage later. As he reviews the security camera footage, our perspective shifts between the actual events and Morrow watching them unfold on the monitor, reminiscent of Ripley watching the Marines get slaughtered through the TV monitors in Cameron's Aliens. Now we get our first glimpse of the Saboteur, who we will later discover to be Petrovich, who is supposed to be in cryostasis, and I knew you couldn't trust that guy after he invented the Metal Gear. He's just too darn smart for his own good. Now we can see the fire was simply a distraction to lure the other crewmates and let the facehuggers do the rest, just like the plan Morrow's asking Slightly to pull off in Neverland, which could be where he got the idea. Next we turn back to Zaveri, who is pushing through some big feelings on her boyfriend's fresh facelift. She takes out a vial of dirt labeled Utah, which we can only assume is where one of them calls home, and pours it over the cryotube. Now we've seen space travelers in many a sci-fi series carry a piece of their homeworld with them. Typically it's used as a reminder of home and many small things that they miss about life there that they don't have in space. But it's based on the use of dirt in burial traditions. Using dirt or soil from one's home in a burial is often a way to connect those who died abroad with their roots. And there are even companies that will sell dirt from other countries, specifically to be used when burying loved ones, like Handful of Home does in Ireland. Here, Zaveri uses it similarly, almost as if she knows just how doomed Bronsky is, even in cryo. But as we see later in the episode, it becomes a metaphor for how much sanity she has left. By pouring some on Bronsky, we can see that she was spiraling even before Morrow woke up. It's also interesting that the way the dirt falls on the cryo chamber makes it look like the exact place where the Xenomorph will later burst from his chest. Now, spliced into the scene, we see Morrow watching them do the nasty on the monitor, something Clem recorded and bragged to him about earlier.
Hey, I recorded something if you want to see.
His reaction not only reinforces his disconnect and disgust toward any form of intimate human emotion, but it also presents a stark contrast between the other scenes of Zaveri's heartfelt goodbye. Seeing them together rapidly exposes us to a broad spectrum of human emotions, while also showing how massively distracted they are from the multiple looming threats on board, as the final shot shows the facehugger releasing its grip from Bronsky, indicating that he has been incubated. Then we revisit the engineers, who show the toll this late-stage capitalistic nightmare takes on someone. The older veteran is not only doing all the work, but we can see just how poorly educated his trainee is, who doesn't even understand the difference between geology and biology. The engineering department almost presents a direct contrast to the engineers from the prequels.
Oh yeah, I remember them, but maybe everybody else needs a reminder.
So of course the engineers were humans' ancient alien ancestors who created life and the Xenomorphs. They're essentially gods, all-knowing and all-powerful. The engineers aboard the Maginot are the complete opposite. They're the most human of humans, average salt-of-the-earth space truckers, just like the rest of the crew. We then see Shmuel try tricking his apprentice into giving him half his pie, but the young Padawan shows that he's much more street smart than book smart. The fact that he's been an apprentice for 65 years shows how advancing one's career relies solely on the historical knowledge passed down from one of the more experienced, rather than some kind of optimized corporate program that you would expect. However, as time goes on and they work their lives away, like Shmuel has, they become increasingly disconnected from society on Earth. Their outdated street cons, something generations below are quick to recognize, even when they know nothing about the actual job they were hired for. Morrow interrupts them, asking for blueprints so he can root out the Saboteur, which is the first time the engineering department has even heard of it. Interestingly enough, even after he confesses it to them, he also threatens them to remain quiet about this, just as Zafiri told him to earlier. Despite knowing she's compromised, he still follows his orders.
Good soldiers follow orders.
He does so by threatening to withhold his pay, reminding us that Weyland-Yutani is not the only one putting profit over people. The crew prioritizes their paycheck over their own lives, but they're the only ones who end up having to pay the price for doing so. In the armory, we see a new semiotic sign over the gun rack, clearly indicating where the ammo is stored. Now, the Nostromo didn't have any guns aboard, outside of the mining laser pistols they took with them when they landed on LV-426. But none of them shot live rounds like this, which is why they resorted to using flamethrowers. Clearly, the Maginot is more equipped for this kind of threat than the Nostromo was. Then we see Zafiri head to the Mother interface room, which is the spitting image of the one aboard the Nostromo. Now, Ridley Scott designed it to mimic a niche in a cathedral, with a myriad of blinking lights imitating candles. It's not only a fitting setting for those asking for guidance from above, but it also subtly shows how their employer has become their god. Now, the captain takes this one step further, preparing herself before she goes into the room in the same way Catholics and other religions bless themselves before entering church. She even starts off using verbal commands, almost as if she's praying. She ends up confronting the same complications that Ripley did in the Nostromo's control room as she updates Mother on the crew's status, and it responds by restating the mission's protocols and spamming her with requests to confirm that she understands. When she hesitates, Mother even threatens to remove her from command, wielding the same power that everyone high on the corporate ladder uses against those below them. And then we hear "We'll Meet Again" playing as we turn to Morrow alone in his room before getting into some of the core motivations of his character. Now, I should note that this song plays a very important role in the movie Dr. Strangelove, as it is played over its beginning and end title sequence. Dr. Strangelove is about human nature inevitably leading to nuclear war that destroys humanity, and I think in this show we're seeing something similar. The greed that human beings have is causing the release of these alien life forms that can ultimately wipe the human race from the planet. Now notice that Morrow is smoking a cigar as he looks over letters and pictures of his lost child. We learn that her name is Estelle, and the letters he reads seem to span her entire childhood, all addressed to Data Bear. Now the first talks about the nightmares she had as a child, but the second is from high school and her options for college. The letter states that Weyland-Yutani is actually willing to offer her a full ride, but she would rather go to one of the old world colleges. So at least Weyland-Yutani is willing to cover the cost of a college education for your kids, even if their employees are clearly lacking one, but only through their own highly controlled system. Now what she means by old world colleges are the colleges that have been around for centuries, like Yale or Harvard. In the previous episode, we learned that people think that the old system of governments didn't work, so the corporations had to step in and fix everything. So calling these universities old world is a throwback to the idea of the world before the Five took over. Now the last page he reads is an official letter from Weyland-Yutani explaining that his daughter died in a house fire that took their home. So when he tells Yutani in episode 3,
I don't have a home.
he means it both literally and metaphorically. The letter is signed by Captain Miles, referencing Miles Koff, a famous Irish soldier who died after being hired to fight by the US. He was killed in the Battle of Little Bighorn for quick cash, just like the Maginot crew taking their lives for monetary gains. Now the letter states that her belongings will be held for Mara's return in 53 years, meaning she died only 12 years into the 65-year trip, likely before the crew even arrived at the extraction site. When he puts the pictures away, we see a magazine for a watch that looks just like the same kind of watch that Ridley and the Nostromo crew wore. And then we move to a shot of Raheem smoking, which is always ironic given that he's the ship's doctor, overlaid on top of a shot of the exterior of the Maginot where we see the captain's body ejected into space, just like they did originally in Ridley Scott's original, but a bit less forcefully. Then we see a massive explosion on the lower side of the ship that springs Morrow back into action. We see him meet with the captain and Shmuel while Mr. Tang eavesdrops in the corner. Shmuel is clearly bothered by him as the show continues to try and convince us that he is a synth. Even though they want him out of the room, he already knows exactly what's going on and ends his revelation, making this weird, which seems like a unique tick that he has that almost humanizes him in a strange, disturbing way. Shmuel tells them that the explosion took their fuel down to 8%, meaning they'll soon run out, and
the ship turns from missile to arrow.
Now, given that the ship's engines were still going strong even after impact, this feels like a bit of a plot hole, but maybe there's a better explanation down the road. They're interrupted when the alarms to the cryopod breach come over the loudspeakers, taking them back to the same scene that Prodigy discovers at the crash site. When Raheem puts 2 and 2 together, he says,
We know they can survive in the cold vacuum of space, right?
Which is something we've seen the Xenomorphs do before, most notably when the alien queen hitches a ride on the outside of Ridley's ship in Aliens, and it's all thanks to their blood.
I thought their blood was from melting through floors.
Right, but the acidity is actually just a side effect. The Xenomorphs' acid blood is really their main energy source. Their acidic blood produces electrical charges like a living battery, which not only allows them to survive in harsh environments without the need for food, water, and air, but it's also why the facehuggers can stay dormant for centuries before busting like an overcaffeinated toddler when the time is right. The crew runs through their options when Raheem suggests a net, which is not only advice that we see Morrow take in episode 2, but also a callback to Alien vs. Predator, where the Yacha use shrinking nets to catch the drones. The revelation leads Morrow to find some heavier hardware, giving us an explanation for the electro gun that we see him use in episode 3. The pistols fire real bullets, but can also set themselves to a stun mode using electrical impulses to paralyze targets, just like weapons we see in Star Trek and Star Wars.
There's one, set for stun.
Then we turn to Dr. Chibuzzo, who is experimenting on the space ticks while the T-Oculus watches. Now the tubes containing the specimens seem reminiscent of how the failed Ridley clones are displayed in Resurrection. The scene showcases how the specimens humans are much more intelligent than we give them credit for. We see the space sticks capitalize on Chibuzo's complacency as the Oculus tries to warn the Doctor, showing not only how smart this tiny, terrifying Cyclops is, but that it has some level of empathy, which is not what you would expect from a parasitic creature. Of all the crew members' human flaws, Chibuzo seems to represent negligence or at least ambivalence, and we see that on full display here as she gets distracted by the T-Oculus's warnings and fails to properly secure it, while also missing the space tick dump its eggs into her water bottle.
Oh, that's so gross.
And unfortunately, based in reality, many insects such as dragonflies and mosquitoes lay their eggs in water too, but they typically do so to protect them from predators rather than being swallowed whole. However, some parasites like the broadfish worm specifically lay their eggs to be ingested by predators so their offspring will eat them from the inside, as we see the ticks do later. The creators then tease the looming threat by repeatedly having her move to sip the water just to redirect her at the last second. When Rahim comes in, he finds the bug and reminds her to keep the lid on before getting called into an all-hands meeting, bringing her tadpole tap water with her and giving the Oculus enough privacy to break free. So this takes us back to the dining hall that we saw in episode 1, that is an exact recreation from the same set that Ridley Scott used in the original Alien movie. The room is decorated with semiotic standard signs, one for organic storage, referencing the food, electronics, and 3 others, denoting a pressurized zone and suits right outside. When Chibuzo walks in, we hear her complain about Dr. Rahim smoking and how it endangers others, despite the fact that she's the one who brought a cocktail of space creatures into the room. We see Tang is once again teased as a synth after he asks the captain to update the crew on the fuel situation, and Rahim says, everything starts coming together when we see Malachite dabbing some extra hot sauce on his food. Then he takes a massive swig from Chibuzo's contaminated water when he realizes his European taste buds were not made for that much spice. As they exit, we see 3 more signs, specifically for the bridge, indicating that it has both computer terminals and coffee. We then see Morrow reviewing the security logs where he recounts a previous interview he had with Rahim. Like everything else in this franchise, the interrogation room is much more moist than you would expect, which seems like it would be a problem given the giant glowing light on the table. The setting feels less like a scene aboard the Nostromo and much more reminiscent of the gritty, darker settings that we've seen in Aliens 3 and Resurrection. There's also a unique use of lighting here, with the only illumination in the room coming from the table itself, which almost gives the characters the visual effect of holding a flashlight to your face like you're telling a scary story. Now at first, Rahim seems like the obvious suspect, and he even gets nervous as Morrow presents the evidence. However, it's clear that this fear is actually about him being worried the corporation's going to find out about his substance abuse problems. He acts as if he figured out Weyland-Yutani's evil corporate agenda at the end of the day.
I just want to go home.
And real quick, guys, I want to let you know that we have one more live show encore performance at New York Comic Con October 10th at City Winery. You can find links to that below. We are so excited to show you guys the very last performance of this particular live show. We've been touring it across the country. It's going to be a lot of fun with special celebrity guests, exclusive breakdowns, and best of all, we get to meet each other face to face. Ticket links are below. Now, that takes us back to engineering, where Shmuel is working to repair the ship while his apprentice supervises. The show uses a chain hook to imitate a Xeno's descending tail behind Malachite, but he quickly learns that that's not what he should be worried about, as he literally starts puking his guts out. Now, while that's going on, Zafiri and Chibuzo make their way back to the lab, and as they're entering, Chibuzo says,
We took our first readings from the Xenomorph eggs and found elevated levels of gamma radiation,
which adds a bit to the Ovomorph's lore. This could explain how they produce the mysterious blue mist that alerts them to nearby prey, since we saw the mist create radio interference in the original film, just like something with high levels of radioactivity would. Now, of course, Chibuzo can't even get through the details of that before discovering yet another reminder of how bad she is at her job, but they're forced to leave the eye loose in the lab as they're pulled in to help Malachite in the med bay. Now, before we get to that, Morrow interrogates the most obvious suspect, Mr. Tang. He tries to use the nav logs as an alibi, but Morrow claps back with,
Logs can be forged.
To which he replies with,
And some people say, oh, this is just a simulation. That's not the conversation we're having.
referring to the simulation theory, or the idea that all of reality is just a simulation created by a more advanced civilization. And it's the plot of another iconic sci-fi series, This Is Your Mom. I'm sorry, I meant The Matrix. This is where we learn that Tang has been doing more than just watching the women sleep in the cryo chambers.
Doing your filth while she sleeps.
Which is undoubtedly a gross reveal, but it's also our first hard proof that he is in fact human. There's a lot clankers can do, but they can't do that.
Do what?
Ignorance is bliss on this one, Doug, trust me. Anyways, Tang tips Morrow off that the saboteur is someone who is supposed to be in stasis, as we see the Xenos stalk him from above. Now, when he does finally meet his demise, he's attacked from above in the same way Samuel the Engineer was taken out by the Xeno on the Nostromo. The pure terror on his face in his final moments, and the fact that the Xeno hunted him in the first place, gives us the final confirmation that he was a human all along.
The whole time you would... The whole time?
Oh. Morrow then goes back to the monitors to look through the recovered files. He sifts through various crew complaints and secret letters until he finds Petrovich's conversation with Boy that starts with him describing what happened to the crewmates they lost along the way that we heard referenced in episode 1.
We lost a lot of good men getting them.
Saying,
65 years, and all the risk that we took, and the bugs laid eggs in my woman's eyes. And for what? The quarter share for one time.
Meanwhile, he not only witnessed a gruesome death of a fellow co-worker, but likely his wife. The way she died seems like it was done by something other than one of the specimens, or just him combining all of the worst aspects together out of trauma and exhaustion. Now, the tape is a smoking gun, with Petrovich openly agreeing to land the ship in Prodigy's terminal in exchange for a brand new synthetic body for his mind to be uploaded into. It's a bit odd given the technology is so new and he's been in space for 65 years, but I guess while he's in cryo, he keeps up to date with the latest trends.
How do you do, fellow kids?
Petrovich asks what will happen to him if he dies in the crash, to which Boy replies with,
Well, that would suck for you.
Which is essentially a more childish way of sending the message that Mother gave the captain earlier. No matter what choice the crew members make, they're always pawns. They're always expendable. Now Morrow has an actual lead, and things are starting to look a lot more like the flash frame callbacks that we saw in episode 1. He finds Petrovich's cryo chamber empty, confirming that he is, in fact, the mole, and we get a few shots from afar that appear to be from the perspective of the Xeno. He runs past the med bay, where he runs into Zaveri and Shmuel as the doctors try to figure out what's happened to Malkite, using the med scanner that's exactly like the one on the Nostromo. And this is where we get the full story behind the scene that Prodigy witnesses at the crash site, through the medbay's endoscope scanner that captures the same grotesque image that they find in the Prodigy wreckage later. Now, with the ticks inside him, Zafiri figures it's best not to make the same mistake twice, and opts not to throw him in cryo as protocol would suggest, but instead to move forward with the surgery instead, which ends up taking even more lives in the process. Now, while there aren't any examples of ticks behaving like this in the wild, they can cause various diseases if they aren't removed properly. In this case, they not only kill the host, but also spew neurotoxin into the air, something that Joe correctly identified at the crash site.
See the blue lips? Some kind of toxin.
After taking 2 massive L's on the leadership board, Zafiri is paralyzed by her emotions, and Morrow immediately recognizes this and takes full command, providing us with yet another example of his disdain for human emotions. Morrow reminds Clem not to hurt the specimens, seconds before he immediately begins unironically shooting live rounds at Petrovich. After Clem takes a shot to the shoulder, they take refuge in the zoo and he tries to comfort Clem. It's one of the few moments we've seen him show any empathy towards any of the other crewmates, and it's immediately interrupted by Petrovich, who shoots him in the head. Morrow uses the opportunity to sneak behind him, stabbing his knife hand through his back in a pose identical to the way the Alien Queen and Aliens took out Bishop. We even see more of what we saw at the crash site come together, as the ticks begin to feed on Clem and Petrovich's bodies, which explains the 2 drained corpses used for foraging in episode 1. Zafiri then pours out the rest of her dirt, likely to memorialize the ones who died in the medbay, but she quickly runs out, just like her ability to lead. She's so numb she doesn't even notice the Xeno plop behind her, and it doesn't seem to notice her until she moves. As we've said in previous breakdowns, there's a lot of mixed lore when it comes to how the Xenomorphs sense their prey. But this series seems to suggest that they use some form of echolocation that can only detect prey when it's in motion, just like many apex predators in the wild. As it chases her, not only do we get even more shots that line up from the hints that were given in episode 1, but the perspective switches between the Xenos and the captain as she looks behind her, similar to how many of the chase scenes play out in Alien 3 with a much needed CGI update. Now we get another shot from episode 1 and the chase music cuts out for a second, giving us a chance to hear the iconic siren sound used heavily in the first film's promotions. She makes a break for one of the many ladder waves we've seen signs for before welding herself into the bridge of the ship, just like Morrow ends up doing in the end. This is when she finds Schmel, who has a little something in his eye.
Too far! Too far!
And then we get this incredible shot where the T-Oculus lunges after the captain as we zoom out through the window of the door with the Xenomorph thrashing just behind it until it gives up and crawls along the ceiling just like we saw them do in Aliens. Now, this is actually a huge revelation because this is telling us that all of these different alien species are not part of the same hive mind. They are actually predators who will feast and fight on themselves. Now, in that same shot, Morrow crawls out for the vents underneath, but as he manages to make it into the room, he's stuck between two different alien parasites, but for some reason the Oculus tries to take on the Xeno instead. They could be from competing species that come from the same planet, or maybe the Oculus is smart enough to recognize the bigger threat, but it certainly is an interesting detail that I hope gets fleshed out later on. In fact, if I had to bet, I would say that the humans will win by pitting these different aliens against each other. Now, regardless, the Xeno obviously wins this fight since it doesn't have any eyes to replace, and it's able to shake it off pretty quickly. Now, this lines us right back up to the final scene that we saw aboard the Maginot in episode 1, with Zafiri pleading with Morrow outside of the control room to let her in as Morrow welds the door shut and takes shelter in the impact room. The only difference is now we have the context for the song he's humming, "We'll Meet Again," connecting back to his daughter. He isn't scared of the Xeno or death because he believes that death is the only way he's going to be reunited with his daughter.
I just want my kids back.
But in order to make sense of everything he went through on the Maginot and the losses both within his own family and crewmates, it means that it has to count for something, which is why he's so driven to see it through, as we see in this final scene with Yutani. Her royal guard wear red outfits that bear a striking resemblance to Palpatine's royal guard from Star Wars, and she essentially ends up giving him this guard as she leaves the room, showing just how much she trusts this man that she never really knew. The final shot pans out from Morrow to Yutani's balcony, showing the endless metropolis that Yutani controls, as Cherub Rock by Smashing Pumpkins closes us out. Now, this is a song about posers in the music industry and how the mass commercialization and superficiality directly contrast with the values that their music is supposed to embody, which fits everything we've learned about Morrow this episode. Up until this episode, the show has framed him as a heartless corporate RoboCop whose only motivation is completing the mission. But in reality, he's just another human dealing with loss, like so many others in this series. But just like Cherub Rock, which became the massive commercialized success it was criticizing, Morrow is just as hypocritical. He's motivated by the very human emotions that he resents. His emotions define him just as much as they define each member of the crew who lost their lives. So that's everything we found in episode 5, but what did you guys think of the episode? Are there any details we missed? If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments or at me on Twitter at Ryan Airy or in our free to join Discord server. And if you hated this breakdown, go yell at Dodd since he wrote the script. You can find his channel link below. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.